Hello everyone, welcome to Part 5, the European Moment in World History, 1750 to 1914. Before we get into the Atlantic Revolutions, I want you to keep some things in mind. European centrality and the problem of Eurocentrism. Two major phenomena mark the quote-unquote long 19th century, 1750 to 1914. This is the creation of modern human societies, an outgrowth of the scientific, French, and industrial revolutions. And we'll cover those in chapters 16 and 17. The ability of these modern societies to exercise enormous power and influence over the rest of the world is significant. Colonial empires were founded in some places, and there was even informal control, economic, military, diplomatic, and missionary control that was established in other places. And the two phenomena gave Western Europe, and even to some extent North America, more prominence in world history than ever before. And there was also unprecedented human intervention in the natural order during this period. And it all comes with Eurocentric geography and history. Europeans' new power included the ability to center human history and geography on Europe. They placed it at the center of the world on maps. They regarded Europe as its own continent. The rest of the world was defined in terms of distance from Europe, like, for example, China being the Far East. Longitude was measured from the prime meridian that runs through Greenwich, England. And history books, textbooks were Eurocentric. Non-European peoples were regarded as static and unchanging, and they weren't progressive. And the general view that backward peoples must either Europeanize or go extinct. So Eurocentrism wasn't really challenged until around 1950, and the discipline of world history emerged after World War II with a global goal of counteracting Eurocentrism. And there are 5 answers to the problem of European centrality. We need to remind ourselves how brief the European moment in world history has been. And also, Europe rose to dominance within an international context. For example, only the withdrawal of the Chinese fleet allowed European domination of the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. 2, disease and internal divisions of Native Americans made the European takeover of the Americas possible. And the scientific revolution drew on Islamic science and information from around the world. And the Industrial Revolution benefited from the new world resources and markets. And lastly, the local elites cooperated with European domination. Europe's rise to global dominance was not easy or automatic by any means. Peoples of the world used Europeans and their ideas for their own purposes. The adaptation of borrowings to local circumstances, encounters between culturally different peoples are the most interesting stories of modern world history. And Europeans were not the only ones in town. Asians, Africans, and Middle Easterns all had their concerns as well. So yes, the European moment in world history is significant, but is best understood in a larger context of interaction and exchange. So now let's talk about the Atlantic Revolutions. And first we're going to look at them in a global context. The revolutionary movements of the 18th century form the most significant part of this chapter. And we'll examine these as a clear break in the way that historians organize the chronological periods of world history. We'll explore the global consequences of the diffusion of European Enlightenment thought by focusing on examples of how Enlightenment ideas influenced revolutions in the Caribbean and Europe and how it affected labor systems and even national identity. So we'll review how Enlightenment thinkers understood the natural world, critiqued the role of religion in public life, and even challenged existing social and political relationships. And we'll examine the vast expanse and diversity in Enlightenment thought that will help you as students make connections with the variety of different revolutionary movements that are mentioned throughout this chapter. Chapter 16 contains separate sections for the North American and French revolutions, and it's important to think about points of comparison between the two revolutions. It is especially important to focus on how Enlightenment ideas influenced the changing functions of political states. And the material on the Haitian Revolution is especially important because the French and Haitian revolutions occurred almost simultaneously, and because Haiti had previously been a colony of France, it makes sense to teach them in combination with each other. The effects of one revolution on the other are most clear when viewing them together. Now, Enlightenment values also influenced the movement to abolish slavery. Although the Enlightenment is often viewed as a movement against the authority of the Christian church, both Christian and Enlightenment thinkers who valued the dignity of man united against slavery. And this time period also saw the rise of nationalism, which is an ideology that focuses on unity based on common language, culture, ethnicity, right? One nation. The power of nationalism is enormous when examining world history beyond 1800. Nationalism became an influential factor in both liberal and conservative movements, and it was also used to support and oppose imperialism. Okay. So who are the figures in this drawing supposed to represent? How do we recognize who they are to represent? Well, to the left we have a woman that represents commoners. It's her right here. She's got the red top, the yellow skirt, right? That's the third estate. Her simple dress, farm hat, and even the spindle of wool suggests that she stands for farmers and workers. She is riding a woman whose elaborate hair and hat and this oversized head, together with this big bow and this big dress, suggests that she's meant to represent the aristocracy. In the front of both of them is a nun, representing the clergy, with this plain black robe, black hood, and the rosary beads in her hands. Now, where is this drawing from? And are there any political developments that it refers to? That's a very good question, because that's the significant part of this image. Now, the writing on the image tells us that the artist is French, and the dress suggests that it's from the latter 18th century, and the title, Long Live the King, Long Live the Nation. Now, the artist produced this work at a time when commoners felt comfortable attacking the nobility, but did not yet challenge the monarchy. Now, this art most likely was part of the rising political debate that led up to the French Revolution of 1789. Now, why do you think the artist included a baby in the picture? I think that's a significant symbol in this picture. The peasant woman is not only engaged in the daily production that makes commoners the backbones of society, right, with her representation of the farmers and the spindle, but she also is responsible for the reproduction of French society. The peasant woman and her baby look remarkably healthy and attractive, but the nun, on the other hand, looks grim, just miserable. That's how the noble woman, the aristocratic woman, she appears sickly. And clearly the artist saw a healthy future in French commoners. It's an excellent representation of the 1780s in France. Okay. The 2010 Haitian earthquake devastated this already impoverished country. But it also reawakened issues from the slave-led revolution in 1804. Heavy reparations to the French had long impeded development of the country. And the Haitian Revolution was part of a wider set of upheavals. The Haitians drew inspiration from the North American and French revolutions, and it really helped to shape the Latin American independence struggles. Echoes of these revolutions, though, reverberated around the world. So it begs the question, from the mid-18th century to the mid-19th century, A series of uprisings took states and empires from Russia to China and from Persia to West Africa. And some historians see these as a part of a global crisis and place the Atlantic revolutions in that context, arguing for a thesis of converging revolutions. So, in the early 18th and mid-19th century, political and social upheavals occurred in several places. And the Atlantic revolutions took place in this wider framework, like I was explaining. Maybe, this is a global crisis and this took place in that context. But the Atlantic revolutions were distinctive. They're costly wars that put strains on European states that were now global rather than regional, and the revolutions were closely linked to one another. Revolutionaries provided advice and encouragement to each other, and they shared a common set of ideas. So while the Atlantic revolutions did not occur in a vacuum, there were several aspects of the North American, French, Haitian, and Spanish American revolutions that make them distinct and clearly part of an identifiable phenomenon in the Atlantic Basin. Importantly, these revolutions show how Europe, the Americas, and Africa were increasingly interconnected in the post-Columbian world. And the intellectual impact of the Enlightenment created a transatlantic print culture where ideas were exchanged and debated. And importantly, this culture argued that human affairs and institutions could be improved, rationalized, and even perfected. John Locke argued that humans should create social contracts between people and the government. And that was central to these debates, was the emphasis of liberty and equality. And are they really viewed as democratic revolutions? The Atlantic revolutions all shared a strong democratic impulse and outcome. Now, with the exception of Haiti, all the revolutions promoted the interests of white men, of property. They did greatly expand political participation throughout their societies. So let's talk about the global impact. And the impact that these revolutions had was immense. Seen in abolitionism, the extension of the right to vote, constitutions were written, greater equality for women, nationalism that I talked about earlier, and ideas of equality. While the immediate events of the Atlantic revolutions were local political acts and events, their impact was truly global, setting the terms and parameters of political debates well into the 20th century. French revolutionary armies marched throughout Europe and into North Africa. Nationalism became the most potent political ideology of the 19th and 20th centuries. Nationalism was one of the many causes of World War I in the early 20th century. And the French Revolution's emphasis on human rights impacted the formation of the United Nations in 1948 and dissident Chinese students in 1989. So these revolutions were truly important. Okay, that's a look at the Atlantic revolutions in a global context. We'll come back to section 2, where we compare the Atlantic revolutions, and it is a lengthy section. I just want to give you a heads up because there's a look at 4 different revolutions. Well, I say 4. 3 revolutions, and then the Spanish-American revolutions in several locations. Okay, see you guys for section 2.